Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Before we even jump in, I actually want you to take just a quick second and think back to when you were a little kid. Think about exactly how your parents praised you. Did they usually say something like, "Wow, you're so smart," when you aced a spelling test? Or was it more like, "Wow, you must have worked really, really hard on that"? Now, I know it might seem like a tiny difference, literally just a few words, right? But today, we're looking at research that suggests those specific words can completely shape your entire mindset for years to come. Today, our main focus is the classic Gunderson et al. Parent praise study from 2013.
Here is our roadmap for today. We're going to cover the aims and the sample, the procedure, the results, the conclusions, and finally, we'll evaluate the study. Basically, this covers exactly what you need for your GCSE Edexcel psychology revision. So, let's get into it.
Section 1. Aims and Sample. Who and Why. Okay, let's dive right into this and look at the investigators' primary aims and exactly who they were studying.
To really understand what Gunderson and her team were aiming to do here, we first have to nail down a crucial piece of jargon, the motivational framework. This is essentially just Gunderson's term for a child's view on whether people's abilities can actually change. Think of it kind of like this. Does a child have an incremental framework, meaning they believe intelligence is malleable and can grow with effort? Or do they have an entity framework, meaning they think abilities are just fixed traits? You're either naturally smart or you aren't. The whole aim of this study was to investigate how parents praise their toddlers in everyday life, and to see if the specific type of praise used could predict these motivational frameworks a full 5 years later.
To pull this off, they looked at a sample of exactly 53 children from Chicago. Break that down, and we've got 29 boys and 24 girls. Now, what is absolutely crucial to remember for your exam is that this sample was actually taken from a much larger pool of 63 families who were already taking part in a completely separate study on language development. Furthermore, this specific group of 53 was deliberately chosen because they were a perfect representation of the demographics of Chicago. We're talking perfectly matched in terms of income, race, and ethnicity. Section 2. The Study Procedure. A 5-year journey. And yeah, you heard that right, 5 years. This wasn't some quick afternoon laboratory experiment. This was a rigorous, multi-year observational journey. Okay, so looking at this timeline, you can really see how this longitudinal data came together over time. Researchers actually went into the participants' homes every 4 months, starting way back when the kids were just 14 months old. For this specific praise study, Gunderson used 90-minute video recordings from 3 key visits, when the children were 14 months, 26 months, and 38 months old. They took these videos, transcribed everything, and coded the exact types of praise the parents used. Then, fast forward years later, when those exact same children were 7 to 8 years old, researchers gave them 2 verbal questionnaires, spaced about 3 months apart. These questionnaires were specifically designed to test their motivational frameworks across 2 different domains. First, intelligence, so their beliefs about how smart someone can get. And second, sociomoral attributes, like whether a kid who misbehaves will just always misbehave. The parents also filled out a questionnaire about their own personal beliefs regarding intelligence. So, the crucial point is how they actually measured the praise in those toddler videos. I want you to take a mental screenshot of this right now, because cementing the difference between these 3 categories is essential for your exam. The researchers coded the transcripts into 3 distinct types. First, you've got process praise. This emphasizes the raw effort the child puts in. Picture a parent enthusiastically saying, "You must have tried so hard," or "Good job drawing." Second is person praise. This implies the child has a fixed innate quality. Imagine a parent saying, "Good girl," or "Wow, you're so smart." And finally, other praise, which is honestly just general positive affirmation, things like "good" or "wow."
Now, a completely brilliant methodological choice here was the use of a double-blind method. Remember, these initial home videos were shot for a totally different study on language development. That means neither the families being recorded nor the researchers actually holding the cameras had any clue the footage would later be analyzed for types of praise. This is fantastic for preventing bias. And to make absolutely sure the coding was accurate, 20% of the transcripts were coded by multiple independent researchers. They ended up achieving an inter-coder reliability score of 0.81. Just to put that into perspective, since 1.0 is perfect agreement, a score of 0.81 indicates incredibly high reliability among the researchers.
Section 3. Results. Praise and motivation. All right, we've set the stage. We know who was studied and exactly how they were measured. Let's move on and reveal what the data actually showed us about how parents talk to their kids. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the actual breakdown of the praise itself. First, a kind of wild fun fact. Praise of any type only made up about 3% of all utterances by parents overall. Literally just 3%. But when we zoom in on just that 3% of praise, we see that general other praise completely dominated at 66%. Process praise, praising that effort, made up 18%, and person praise, praising fixed traits, sat at 16%. Interestingly enough, as the kids got a bit older, from 14 to 38 months, person praise significantly dropped off, while general other praise went up. Process praise basically stayed pretty much the exact same the whole time.
But the data gets even more fascinating when we look at the gender differences. The results showed that boys received significantly more process praise than girls did. Girls, on the other hand, received more person praise and other praise. Fast forward to when the kids were 7 to 8 years old, and the questionnaire data completely reflected this early difference. Boys reported marginally more incremental motivational frameworks than girls, meaning they were much more likely to believe intelligence could be grown and developed. When they broke the data down, this difference was significantly higher for the intelligence domain specifically.
And here it is. This is the biggest, most critical finding of the entire study. There was a significant correlation between the percentage of process praise used when the children were 14 to 38 months old and those exact same children showing an incremental or malleable motivational framework at 7 to 8 years old. To put it simply, praising effort in a toddler directly correlated to their belief in changeable, growable intelligence 5 years later. Now, interestingly, there was no significant correlation found between person praise and fixed entity frameworks, but the sheer power of process praise was crystal clear. Section 4. Conclusions on praise. What does it all mean? Let's transition into the actual conclusions here. What does all this correlational data mean for human behavior, for parenting, and for us?
Gunderson concluded that early process praise is quite literally a strong predictor of a child's future mindset. Because children whose parents used more process praise developed those positive incremental beliefs, the gender difference they uncovered is incredibly important. Think about it. Boys received more process praise, even though overall praise amounts between genders were equal. Gunderson connects this lack of process praise given to girls to existing psychological research, which clearly highlights that girls tend to attribute their failures to a lack of ability and often show decreased persistence and motivation after a failure. Basically, if they aren't being told you worked really hard, they might just default to assuming, I'm just not smart enough.
There is also a pretty ironic twist in the conclusions, a bit of a real-world paradox. You'd probably think parents who personally believed intelligence is malleable would use way more process praise, right? Well, between you and me, the study found the exact opposite. Parents with stronger incremental theories themselves were actually more likely to give fixed person praise to their kids. Why? Well, Gunderson explains that these super well-meaning parents likely believe that the absolute best way to make their child smarter is to boost the child's self-esteem, and they do this by constantly telling them how smart they are using person praise. It's totally done with good intentions for sure, but it completely misses the mark on reinforcing effort.
Section 5. Evaluating the study. Think like a psychologist. Okay, let's shift gears one last time. For your exam, you need to think critically like a psychologist and evaluate the scientific merit of this study. Let's weigh the strengths against the weaknesses.
The strengths here are highly robust. First up, ecological validity. It was conducted in a completely natural setting, the child's own home, meaning the behavior we're looking at was highly likely to be genuine. Second, the double-blind method. This brilliantly reduces researcher bias. Third, that carefully selected Chicago sample. Because it perfectly mirrored the city's demographics, it makes the findings highly generalizable to large, diverse urban populations. And finally, these real-world observational findings beautifully support Carol Dweck's earlier laboratory experiments on mindset. When a natural observation and a controlled experiment both point to the exact same conclusion, the theory becomes much stronger.
But, we always have to counter with the weaknesses. From an exam perspective, the biggest headache here is the element of deception. The participants were explicitly told the study was about language development, not about praise. Now, while that was totally necessary for the double-blind method to actually work smoothly, it's still a standard ethical evaluation point you absolutely need to note down, as it requires a really thorough debrief afterward. Another weakness is the potential for demand characteristics. Even though the parents didn't know the specific topic was praise, they still knew they were being filmed. They might have consciously or even subconsciously changed their behavior to act like perfect parents for the cameras, meaning the data might not be 100% natural.
Now, for a truly top-tier evaluation in your exam, you should always try to bring in competing evidence. And this brings us right to the classic nature versus nurture debate. Gunderson's study heavily supports nurture, the idea that the environment, specifically the literal language our parents use with us, actively shapes our intelligence beliefs and our future outcomes. However, we have to hold this up against the biological perspective. Bouchard and McGew back in 1981 reviewed 111 studies and found incredibly strong correlations between genetic relatedness and IQ. Their research suggests that intelligence is at least partly inherited through genetics, representing the nature side of the debate. This genetic evidence certainly undermines the idea that environment and praise are the absolute only or even the primary factors at play. So we're left with a really fascinating question to ponder. Does how we are praised actually matter more than the genes we inherit? Or is human intelligence just a massively complex dance between the two? Gunderson certainly shows us that the words we choose have incredible, long-lasting power over a child's mindset. But the biological evidence always reminds us of the underlying hardware we are born with. Definitely keep that question in mind as you continue your revision. You now have a complete, fully structured breakdown of the aims, procedure, results, and evaluation of Gunderson's study. Good luck with your GCSE psychology exams. Use all this information to secure those top marks, and I will see you in the next explainer.